They didn't send a priest this time. Just a man like me. When the Vatican called, they didn't summon me to some grand cathedral or hidden underground chamber. No, my instructions came in a plain, sealed envelope delivered to my apartment in Rome. No return address. No explanation. Just a name, a location, and a short note handwritten in Latin. Guard her. 30 nights. Do not speak to her. Do not let her speak. That was it. The name was Sister Miriam. The location, Monastery of St. Agnes, somewhere in the Carpathian Mountains. I had to look it up on an old military map because officially the place doesn't exist. No coordinates, no road. Just a faded mark where the ink had once spelled out something someone tried to erase. I didn't ask questions. Not out loud. My name is George Alden. I'm 38. Once a soldier, then a bodyguard, then something else entirely. After Iraq, after Kandahar, after the nightmares, I tried to live quietly. But the Vatican, well, they find men like me. Men who've seen enough to stop believing in accidents. This wasn't my first strange job. But it was the first time I was told not to speak. I flew into Bucharest under a fake name, met a silent driver who didn't say a word the entire 7-hour trip into the mountains. Snow had already started falling in thick, silent sheets. The trees thinned as we climbed, and the road became more of a memory than a path. Eventually, the tires could go no farther. So I walked. The cold cut through my coat like it had fingers. My boots crunched over old snow and broken bones. Animal, I hoped. The sky above me was a pale bruise, and the only sound was the wind dragging itself through the dead forest. Then I saw it. The monastery rose out of the earth like a buried cathedral pulled halfway to the surface. Black stone, spires cracked with age, windows like sunken eyes. The front gate was open. No welcome, no candles, no voices. Just a feeling, like something had been waiting for me. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and ash. I passed empty pews, decaying icons of saints with faces scratched out, and walls scrawled with Latin prayers that ended in smudged handprints. And then I met him. He stepped from the shadows with a candle in one hand and a staff in the other. Old, thin, hunched. His skin looked like wax left too close to fire. His eyes were cloudy but sharp. He said his name was Brother Calvus. "You're late," he rasped, handing me a rusted iron key. I wasn't told I had a schedule. There are no clocks here, only nights. He led me down a hallway lit by flickering torches. The monastery groaned around us like it was alive and aging with each step we took. "She's in the east wing," he said. "Don't speak to her. Don't ask questions. And when she begins to move in her sleep, pray." "Move how?" "She'll show you." I was too tired to argue. I followed him to a door that looked older than the walls around it. Heavy oak, bound in dark metal. It smelled faintly of incense and something sour, something rotting. Calvus unlocked it. Inside was a small stone room. A single bed. A crucifix above it, bent like it was in pain. And sitting at the edge of the bed, facing the wall, was Sister Miriam. She didn't turn when we entered. She wore an old black habit, threadbare and faded, and a thick white blindfold wrapped tightly around her eyes. Her hands rested on her lap, folded like she was mid-prayer. Her mouth was shut, but there was something about it, something taut and unnatural. Her lips didn't seem like they were sealed. They looked hidden. "She hasn't spoken since 1955, Calvus said quietly. "Not a word. Not a sound. We intend to keep it that way." "Why me?" I asked. He looked at me for a long time before answering. "Because you've already seen hell. Now you need to understand silence." Then he left me alone with her. And the silence pressed in like a second skin. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching her breathe. Waiting for something, anything. A twitch. A whisper. A sign. But she just sat there, still as stone. And I realized something I hadn't expected. I was afraid. Not of her, but of what might happen if she opened her mouth. I'd been briefed, signed the forms, took the oath, and boarded the plane out of Rome with little more than a black duffel bag and 100 unanswered questions. They didn't tell me much, just that my destination lay in the Carpathian Mountains, on the outskirts of a dying Romanian village named Cruciser, and that my purpose was to watch a woman who didn't speak. A woman who hadn't spoken in 70 years. The flight was short. The drive wasn't. They sent a Vatican driver, an older man with deep wrinkles, and the look of someone who'd seen things he never dared put into words. He didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Romanian, so we sat in silence for most of the trip. The radio didn't work. The heat was patchy. The windows fogged up even though it wasn't raining. And somewhere past the third hour of twisting mountain roads, I started to realize how far from the world I was being taken. We passed fewer and fewer signs of life. Wooden homes gave way to dense, colorless woods. No power lines. No gas stations. No dogs barking in the distance. Only snow-covered earth, claw-like branches, and the occasional crucifix nailed into trees as if to warn whatever passed through. It was almost dark when the driver pulled over and pointed ahead. The road ended at a rusted gate half sunken in the snow. A narrow trail led up the hill, barely visible in the fading light. He made the sign of the cross 3 times, then handed me a flashlight and gestured for me to walk. I opened my mouth to protest, to ask questions, but he shook his head once, firm, final, and then turned the car around. Just like that, I was alone. The air was thin and sharp. My boots crunched over brittle ice. Every breath sent fog spilling from my lips. The flashlight flickered like it didn't want to stay awake. As I climbed, the silence became more than absence. It was pressure, a weight, no wind, no birds. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. Halfway up, I saw the tower. The monastery of St. Agnes stood like a wound in the mountain, tall, jagged, and wrong. Its stone was darker than the landscape around it, almost black, as if burned in some ancient fire. Iron bells hung from its crooked tower, motionless despite the cold. There were no signs of life, no smoke, no candles in the windows. Just the stillness of something old enough to have been forgotten by time. The door creaked open before I could knock. A man stood there, thin, hunched, wrapped in layers of wool and leather. His face was lined like an old book, and his eyes were clouded with age but sharp beneath. "You are George," he said in broken English. I nodded. "Yes. From Rome." He looked me over like he was judging whether I'd survive the night. Then he stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. The warmth inside was bitter, dry, and made my lungs itch. The air smelled of candle wax, old stone, and something else I couldn't quite place, like decayed flowers and iron. "I am Brother Calvus," he said. "I care for the monastery, what's left of it." I set down my duffel and glanced around the room. The walls were thick and uneven, built long before symmetry was a concern. Faded tapestries lined the halls. Every step echoed too loudly. "She is upstairs," he added. "The nun?" He nodded. "Sister Miriam." The way he said her name, quietly with a hint of fear, it made my skin crawl. "She does not speak," I offered, trying to sound neutral, like this was just another job. "She cannot," Calvus whispered. "She must not." He handed me a small leather-bound book, no title on the cover, just a worn cross etched into its surface. "Rules," he said. "You read. You follow." Before I could ask anything more, he turned and disappeared into the hallway, his steps nearly silent. I stood alone in the entryway of a place that felt more tomb than sanctuary. My breath fogged the air. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked. The flashlight in my hand gave one last blink, and died. Welcome to St. Agnes, I thought. A monastery forgotten by man, and remembered by something else. It was near dusk when Brother Calvus led me through the eastern wing of the monastery, a wing I hadn't been allowed to enter until now. The air there was colder. Not just physically, but in that strange way where it felt like the walls were watching you. There were no modern lights, only iron sconces holding thick beeswax candles that burned low, their flames leaning as if afraid to stand still. The stone floor groaned beneath our boots, as if we were walking across the bones of something ancient. We passed a long hallway with wooden doors on either side. Most were shut, locked with rusted latches. Their plaques were blank, stripped clean of names. One door was open just a crack, and I saw the corner of a metal bed frame and what looked like a child's rosary, snapped in half on the floor. "This used to be the novices' dormitory," Brother Calvus whispered, his voice thin like dry parchment. "There were many here once. Now only her." He stopped in front of a tall wooden door at the end of the hall. Unlike the others, it had carvings, symbols I didn't recognize. They weren't crosses. They looked older. Worn deep into the wood, they formed a ring, like an eye with no pupil. Brother Calvus turned to me. "She will not speak. She must not speak. You are not to touch her. Do not remove the blindfold. Do not kneel. You stand always. You watch. That is all." I nodded. I wasn't sure why I was holding my breath. Maybe part of me already knew this wasn't going to feel like any other job. He opened the door with a long, low creak. Her room was lit by a single candle placed at the foot of the bed. Shadows stretched across the stone walls like claws. She sat in a wooden chair, facing the far window. The window itself had been sealed with bricks, yet she faced it like she could still see through it. She didn't turn when we entered. Sister Miriam. She was thin, so thin it looked like the air around her might tip her over. Her habit was clean but aged, a soft gray from time, not wear. Her hands rested on her lap, pale and still. But what struck me hardest wasn't her silence or her size. It was the blindfold. Wrapped tightly around her head, the cloth was not white, as I expected, but black, thick and knotted behind her skull. It looked ceremonial. Protective, almost. Like it wasn't covering her eyes, but sealing something in. She has not seen the light in 70 years, Calvis said softly beside me, as if we were in a tomb. And no light has seen her. I stepped closer. Just one step. She turned her head, slow, precise, toward me. Not startled. Not curious. Just aware. It was like being seen without eyes. I swallowed, and for the first time in years, I felt afraid in a way I couldn't explain. Not the fear of danger. The fear of meaning. Of being part of something I didn't choose. She knows you're here, Brother Calvis whispered. She always knows. Can she hear me? I asked before thinking. Sister Miriam didn't react. But Calvis did. He inhaled sharply. You must not speak to her directly. Why? If you give her a voice, even for a moment, it may answer back through her. That silenced me. We stood there for a while. I don't know how long. I watched her breathe, slow, measured, like someone sleeping in a dream they didn't want to wake from. At one point, her fingers twitched. Not like a spasm, more like a signal. Deliberate, but not meant for me. Has she always lived here? I asked. Brother Calvis nodded. She was born in this monastery. Her parents left her here during the war. We believe she spoke once, when she was a girl. What did she say? He looked at me, his eyes as hollow as the monastery itself. She said she saw the silence, and it looked back. I didn't ask anything else after that. We left the room in silence. As the door creaked shut, I caught one final glance at her, Sister Miriam, the silent one. She hadn't moved since we entered. But somehow I knew she had been waiting for me. Not to protect her. To be her witness. The next morning came slower than it should have. Time here didn't behave like it did back home. I checked my watch a dozen times, but the hands barely moved. I hadn't slept. Just sat in the chair outside her door, gripping the handle of my sidearm, listening to the wind scrape the windows like fingernails. Brother Calvis found me there at dawn. He didn't ask why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe because he already knew. He handed me a worn leather-bound book. Its pages were yellowed, some brittle and stained with water, or something darker. The cover was plain, no title. Just a faint mark that looked like a cross with a circle through it. These are the rules, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Not from Rome. Not from men. These come from something older. I opened it. The text inside was a mess of languages. Latin. Romanian. A few lines looked like Greek. But someone recently had gone through and scribbled English translations in black ink. I read aloud. Rule 1. Do not speak directly to Sister Miriam, even in greeting. Rule 2. Do not ask her questions. Do not answer hers. Rule 3. Never allow her to be alone between dusk and dawn. Rule 4. Do not touch her blindfold. It was placed by holy hands. Only death may remove it. Rule 5. If she opens her mouth, kneel. Recite the 7th prayer of binding. Do not listen. Do not run. Do not speak. I stopped there. I couldn't read anymore. The ink on the 5th rule trembled. Literally trembled, as if the page itself recoiled from the words. Is this a joke? I asked Calvis. He just shook his head and placed one pale, bony hand on my shoulder. I've served here for 60 years. She was already silent when I arrived. Why not transfer her to Rome? Let the cardinals deal with it. Calvis gave me a look I'll never forget, like I had asked why the sun didn't rise at night. This place is not meant to be found. Rome keeps secrets far from its heart. St. Agnes is the bottom of the well. Things sink here. His words echoed in my head as I made my way back down the narrow stone corridor. The monastery felt colder now, like the walls were listening. I peeked into Sister Miriam's chamber again. She hadn't moved. Still in that same chair, hands folded neatly in her lap, rosary wrapped around her fingers. A single candle burned beside her bed, flickering without wind. And then, she turned her head. Not fast. Not like a horror movie jump scare. Just slow. Steady. Her face moved until it was facing the door. Facing me. She couldn't have seen me. The blindfold was wrapped tightly across her eyes, knotted at the back of her head. Her skin was paper thin. Veins blue as ink ran beneath. But she knew I was there. Her mouth didn't move. But her lips, I swear they were slightly parted, like she was about to say something. I backed away. Fast. Down the hall. Past the cold chapel. Into the dining room, where the fire never seemed to warm the stones. I sat alone and stared at that book of rules, still clutched in my hand. It felt heavier now. Later that evening, I asked Calvis if she ever tried to speak. He nodded slowly, eyes lost in memories I didn't want to see. Only once. The night her mother died. The mountain shook, the chapel roof cracked. We heard her breathe in, like preparing to speak. He paused. And? She didn't. She shut her mouth. But the fire in the hearth went out. The walls bled wax. And the birds didn't sing for 3 days. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. Maybe that was the point. That night, I slept just outside her door again. Candle burning beside me. Gun at my side. I kept the book open to Rule 5. In the silence, I heard something. Not footsteps. Not whispers. Breathing. Not mine. Not Brother Calvis's. It was low. Ragged. Deep. It was coming from inside her room. And it wasn't hers. I didn't expect the silence to be this heavy. It was a kind of silence that didn't just fill the room. It pressed against your skin like cold hands. The stone walls of the monastery held onto the quiet like they'd been doing it for centuries, swallowing even the sound of my own breath. I sat outside Sister Miriam's chamber, just like the instructions said, with an old oil lamp flickering beside me. No electricity. No clocks. Just the soft hiss of the flame, and the slow ticking of something I couldn't place. Brother Calvis had muttered something before retreating to his quarters, something in Latin I couldn't fully understand. I think it was a prayer, or maybe a warning. Either way, he said it while staring at Sister Miriam's door like it might open on its own. The hallway was narrow, the ceiling arched and low. Paintings of saints lined the walls, faded faces with hollow eyes. Some of them were peeling, revealing the older, darker images underneath. One painting had no face at all, just smears where the eyes should have been, and I didn't like the way that empty spot seemed to line up perfectly with where I was sitting. I checked my gun out of habit. It was there, heavy at my side, though it felt stupid. What was I going to shoot? A 92-year-old nun, who hadn't spoken in 70 years? Still, the Vatican had sent me. And they don't send people like me for babysitting duty. Around midnight, the wind picked up. It howled through the stone like a living thing, slipping between the cracks and moaning across the wooden beams above. But then I noticed something strange. There was another sound beneath the wind. Whispers. Faint, like the hush of someone speaking behind a closed curtain. I leaned forward, trying to catch it, but the moment I moved, it stopped. I stood up slowly, lamp in hand, and placed my ear against the old wooden door of Sister Miriam's chamber. Nothing. No movement, no breath, no creaking floorboards. She was still, as always. But the silence inside that room felt even thicker than the hallway. Like it was being forced. Like the air inside didn't allow sound at all. I backed away and sat down again, rubbing my temples. The wind screamed louder outside. The whispering returned, not from her room this time, but behind me. Down the hallway. I turned quickly, lamp stretched out, casting long shadows on the stone walls. No one there. I told myself it was just the wind. Just the monastery playing tricks on me. But then I saw the candle. It was one of the chapel candles, the thick kind with the red wax, sitting on the windowsill down the hall. I remembered seeing it earlier in the chapel. It wasn't supposed to be here. The wick was still smoking. Someone or something had just been there. I stood slowly, keeping my steps quiet. My boots made soft echoes on the stone as I moved toward the window. The candle was warm. The glass fogged up slightly from the heat. But outside I saw nothing. Just snow and forest and endless black trees swaying like tall, watching figures. That's when I heard the scratching. Not on the walls. From inside Sister Miriam's room. It was a gentle scraping like fingernails on stone, slow, careful, rhythmic. I spun around and walked straight back to the door. Sister Miriam? I said, regretting it immediately. I wasn't supposed to speak to her. I wasn't even supposed to say her name. No reply. But the scratching stopped. I pressed my palm against the door. Cold. Too cold. The kind of cold that doesn't belong in a room with someone alive inside. I considered going in. The key hung from my belt, just in case. But something inside me, something deeper than fear, told me not to. Instead, I leaned down and peered through the keyhole. Darkness. And then, just as I began to pull away, I saw it. A single pale finger, pressed gently against the other side of the keyhole. As if she knew I was watching. I stumbled back, heart thudding in my chest, and dropped the lamp. The flame snuffed out instantly. Total darkness. I stood there, breathing hard, trying not to blink too loud, listening for footsteps, or whispers, or breathing. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my blood pounding in my ears. And then, in the pitch black, came the voice. Not loud. Not human. Not spoken with any mouth. Just inside me. She is not alone in there. I don't know how long I stood frozen, staring at that door. Eventually, Brother Calvis returned with another lamp. He didn't ask why mine was broken. He just set the new one down beside me and walked away like nothing had happened. As he turned the corner, I swear I saw him cross himself 3 times. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept watch until the pale light of dawn bled through the stained glass windows. And still, the silence from her room never broke. Not once. Not even a breath. But I knew something had been with her. And it knew I was here now. Watching. Listening. Waiting. I woke up with the taste of ash in my mouth. The fire was still burning in the hearth when I opened my eyes, but the warmth hadn't touched my skin. It felt cold inside me, like something had sunk into my bones during the night and decided to stay there. I sat up on the stiff cot, rubbed my temples, and tried to remember the dream. There had been a chapel, burning, and a girl, her mouth wide open, eyes white with terror. But no sound, just flames and silence. I stood, bones cracking from the damp cold. The monastery was too quiet again, like the walls were holding their breath. Even the wind outside had stilled. I made my rounds like I had the past few nights, flashlight in one hand, rosary in the other. I wasn't religious. Not really. But here, I didn't trust science. I needed something older. As I passed through the east hallway, the one with the cracked Virgin Mary statue at the end, I heard it again. Whispers. Soft. Slippery. Coming from the shadows. They didn't sound human, not entirely. It wasn't the whisper of someone trying to keep a secret. It was the whisper of something remembering, like it had been here long before me, long before the monastery, and it had waited all this time to be heard. I turned sharply. Who's there? Nothing. I held my breath. The whispering stopped. But then, in the silence, I heard something worse. Footsteps. Soft, bare feet. Behind me. I spun around. Empty corridor. Stones. Cold air. Then I noticed the candles lining the hallway, those little iron sconces fixed into the wall. The flames were bending toward me. Not flickering randomly, leaning, as if pulled by something standing behind me. I didn't turn. Not right away. My body froze, instincts clenching every muscle. But curiosity is a curse. I turned slowly. Still nothing. But my flashlight flickered, once, twice, and in that brief stuttering of light, I saw her. Not Sister Miriam. Not a nun. A girl in fire. Skin blackened. Mouth open. Screaming silently. Then gone. I ran. My feet echoed through the stone halls as I returned to the sanctuary. There she was, Sister Miriam, sitting just as I had left her. Blindfold on. Hands folded neatly in her lap. Still as death. She didn't look at me, couldn't. But I felt her head tilt, ever so slightly, like she knew I was afraid. Like she could smell it. I took slow steps toward her. My heart was still thudding in my chest. I saw her, I whispered. I saw someone. A girl. She was on fire. No reply. Of course. Her lips moved. Just a twitch. Not enough to be speech. Not yet. I backed away. I didn't like how the air felt around her. It was thick. Not humid, dense. Like words were trapped in it, pushing to get out. Back in my quarters, I tried to sleep again. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the dream returned. Only now, I was the one standing in the chapel. And the flames weren't around me, they were inside me. My chest burned. My tongue ached. And behind me, Sister Miriam stood in the shadows, face still, eyes blindfolded. She spoke. Just one word. I couldn't hear it. But I felt the echo tear through me like a blade of ice and fire, splitting me in half. I woke screaming. There was blood on my pillow. From my ears. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By dawn, I started to wonder something horrible. What if these weren't dreams? What if they were memories? And what if they weren't mine? I didn't sleep after what I saw the night before. The vision kept replaying in my head like a broken reel. Flames crawling up a chapel's walls, a circle of robed figures chanting in a language that didn't belong to this world, and a girl, her mouth open in a scream, yet no sound came out. I woke up drenched in sweat, even though the stone walls around me were frozen with mountain air. I lit one of the oil lanterns that lined the hallway, the electric lights flickering like they were scared of something too. Maybe they were. St. Agnes was quiet. Too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of silence that presses in on your chest like you're being watched by something that knows how to stay hidden. I decided I needed to move. Brother Calvis was nowhere to be found again. He was like a ghost in this place. I'd started to wonder if he was even real. My footsteps echoed down the stone corridor as I passed the chapel, the main sanctuary, the old dining hall. Everything was too still. I wasn't even sure if Sister Miriam was breathing. Something inside me told me the answers weren't going to be found up here. They were below. I returned to the corridor where I'd first noticed the uneven stones the day before. The far east hallway, lined with crumbling saint statues, their faces worn smooth by time. There was one statue, a headless angel with one arm outstretched, that seemed off balance. I crouched down behind it and brushed my hand across the floor. A breeze, cold and damp, curling up from between the cracks. I pressed my fingers to the stone. It shifted slightly under pressure, and then click, a low grinding sound rumbled beneath my feet. The floor moved. A small square panel slid open, revealing a narrow stairway spiraling down into blackness. I hesitated for maybe 2 seconds. Then I picked up the lantern and descended. The air grew colder with each step. The smell of mold and iron filled my nose, earth and rust, like a battlefield buried under centuries of prayer and denial. The steps groaned beneath my boots, and I started to count them to keep calm. 78 steps. 79. 80. Then I hit the floor. The crypt stretched out ahead like a tunnel carved by God's forgotten hand. Arched ceilings, narrow walls, and alcoves full of decaying wood coffins. The lantern's flame flickered nervously as I moved deeper. That's when I saw the door. Old oak, reinforced with iron bands. A large red mark had been painted across it, something like a circle of thorns with a dagger piercing the center. It wasn't any Christian symbol I knew. And written above the doorway in carved Latin, Taciturnitas custodet portam. Silence guards the gate. I pushed the door open. The room was round, maybe 20 feet across, and in the middle stood a wooden pedestal. On it lay a weathered leather book, its edges singed like it had been pulled from a fire. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and opened it. The handwriting was rough, hurried. The ink smeared in places. But the name on the first page was still clear. Father Felix Harrow, 1955. I swallowed. I knew that name. I had read it in a Vatican file. A name attached to forbidden exorcism rites. A man believed to be dead. Or worse, hidden. I turned the pages slowly. The first entry was dated September 13th, 1955. Felix described the arrival of a young nun named Miriam. She had been brought to the monastery after an incident at a mission school in Transylvania. She'd gone mute after what the church called a spiritual rupture. He believed she had been touched by something ancient. Something, not of the inferno, but deeper. As I read, my hands started to shake. He hadn't tried to save her. He'd tried to use her. He spoke of a ritual to summon what he called the Angel of Silence. He believed it would grant divine insight, truth beyond human language. But the ritual went wrong. It always does in these stories, doesn't it? Instead of a blessing, something entered Sister Miriam. Felix wrote that her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Everyone else in the chapel died that night. Burned, suffocated, or driven mad. Only she survived. And she never spoke again. The last sentence was underlined, scrawled in jagged strokes. The seal holds only as long as she is silent. But it weakens every 70 years. I dropped the book. My knees felt weak. The room seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't a nun I was guarding. She was a tomb, a living prison, and I wasn't here to protect her. I was here to make sure she never said a word. I turned to leave. As I stepped back into the corridor, I thought I saw something in the corner of the crypt. A figure hunched, watching. But when I raised my lantern, it was gone. Maybe it was never there. Maybe I just wanted it to be. Because the alternative was worse. That it was still there. And it was waiting. Waiting for her to speak. Waiting for the gate to open. Waiting for silence to end. The journal smelled of mildew and old smoke. Its leather cover was cracked like dry skin, its pages yellowed and soft to the touch. I sat cross-legged on the crypt floor, my back pressed against a cold slab of stone, candlelight flickering around me. The silence down here felt thicker, heavier, like the air was holding its breath. I read slowly, lips barely moving. The handwriting was tight and careful, each line carved into the page like a confession. January 3rd, 1955. The exorcism failed. That was the first line that made me stop. My eyes trailed back over it again and again. I could almost feel the weight of that failure pressing through time, curling in the damp air around me. The next entry described a girl, barely 20. Her name wasn't written, but I knew. Somehow, I knew it was Sister Miriam. Felix wrote about her in cold detail, like she was an object instead of a person. She was a vessel, he wrote, chosen, or perhaps sacrificed. According to him, the demon they tried to exorcise wasn't from the normal ranks of hell, not the kind that shrieked and contorted and spat blasphemies. No, this one didn't speak at all. It absorbed sound. That line haunted me. It absorbed sound. When it entered the girl, the room fell silent. Not the kind of quiet you get when you turn off the radio or close a door. No, this was something deeper. A kind of silence that eats everything else, breath, heartbeat, thought. I turned the page. Felix wrote that the demon had no name they could trace, no record in centuries of Vatican libraries. It had no form except for the silence it left behind. During the ritual, when they tried to force it out, Miriam stopped screaming. Not from relief. Not from exhaustion. She simply had no more voice to use. Felix believed something terrible. The demon hadn't left. It had become her silence. That's how he phrased it. It became her silence. As if it had hidden inside the absence of sound, buried itself so deeply within her soul that only by remaining quiet could it stay asleep. I remember my hands shaking as I read that. I remember the way the candle flickered and nearly died, just as my eyes landed on the next line. If she speaks again, the seal will break. I closed the journal for a moment, pressing my palms against my eyes. My heart was thudding now, and I couldn't tell if the pounding was inside me or echoing from deeper in the crypt. What had they done to her? What kind of twisted ritual turns a human being into a lock? I opened the journal again. Felix had written obsessively about the god of silence. Not a demon, not in the traditional sense. He believed this entity predated the Christian understanding of evil. Something older, something that watched creation from outside time. He said its purpose was not to torment, but to erase. Not just bodies, not just voices, but memory, sound, thought. If unleashed, it would unmake the world by undoing its voice. A quiet apocalypse. My fingers brushed the final page. There was no signature, just a single line, scratched so deep into the parchment it nearly tore through. Silence is the last mercy. I sat there for a long time, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall, the journal resting on my knees like a tombstone. Everything I thought I knew about Sister Miriam had shattered. She wasn't just a frail old nun. She wasn't even just a victim. She was a living seal, a prison wrapped in flesh and devotion. And every moment she remained silent was a moment the world stayed intact. The whispers I'd heard, the shadows moving wrong in the corners of my eyes, the dreams, none of it was random. None of it was hallucination. The entity inside her was stirring. And if Felix Harrow was still alive, he wasn't coming to save her. He was coming to set it free. I rose to my feet, bones stiff from the cold floor, and tucked the journal under my arm. As I stepped out of the crypt, I didn't notice that my candle had gone out. The darkness behind me was full of breathless anticipation, like something waiting for a sound. Any sound, even a whisper, even one word. The snow hadn't stopped since the fourth night. It came down in fine, patient flakes that never made a sound when they touched the old stones of St. Agnes. Every morning, I'd wake to find the world whiter, quieter. It wasn't just winter anymore. It felt like the monastery was slowly being buried, like God had turned his face away and let the sky weep for something it couldn't name. That night, something changed. I was sitting in the hallway outside Sister Miriam's room, like always. My flashlight flickered even with fresh batteries. The candle beside me danced more violently than the breeze should have allowed. She was behind the heavy wooden door, silent as ever. I'd come to find comfort in her silence, strange as that sounds. I think it was the only thing in that place that felt constant. It was around midnight when I heard the creak. Not inside the monastery. Outside. There were no animals that came this far. Even the birds avoided this place. I'd barely seen a crow since I arrived. The only living thing I knew of for miles was Brother Calvis, and he'd been coughing in bed for 2 days straight, too weak to walk. And even if he could, he wouldn't be outside at this hour. I stood slowly, flashlight in hand. My other hand went to the sidearm tucked in my belt. Vatican issue, blessed, they said, though I never understood what that meant. Holy bullets? I'd asked once. They didn't laugh. The hallway groaned as I stepped forward. The front door loomed at the end of the corridor, bolted shut, dust gathering in the corners like spiderwebs of time. I undid the latch and opened it with both hands. The cold slapped me in the face like a hand from the grave. The forest stood still. Tall, dark pine trees stood like sentinels against the white landscape. The wind whispered through their needles, but beneath that sound, beneath the trees and wind and distant cracking ice, I saw him. A figure, standing at the edge of the woods. He didn't move. He didn't wave. He simply stood there, just beyond the stone fence, far enough that I couldn't make out a face. Just a shape. Cloaked. Hooded. And though I couldn't see his eyes, I felt them. Felt them in my bones. I raised my flashlight. It barely reached him. The beam flickered once, and then went out completely. No time to change the batteries. I pointed my pistol, aiming center mass. My voice came out rough, uncertain. "Who's there?" No answer. The wind stopped. Even the snow seemed to pause, like the world held its breath. Then the figure turned. Slowly. As if obeying some unspoken cue. It didn't run. It didn't fade. It simply walked backward into the woods. And I swear, its feet didn't touch the ground. I stood there for too long. The cold bit into my hands, my ears, the tip of my nose. Finally, I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt. I wanted to believe it was just a dream. My imagination. Stress. But when I turned around, I saw it. Footprints. Just inside the doorway. Not mine. Not Brother Calvis's. Wet, black-soled prints. Leading into the monastery. But never back out. I followed them with my eyes. They curved toward the far hallway. The one that led toward the lower levels. Toward the sealed stairwell I'd found 2 nights ago. The one that went into the crypts. My breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to follow. Step by slow step. Gun raised. Every board beneath my boots moaned like the floor didn't want to hold me. The footprints were fading, melting into the stone, but they were real. And then they stopped. Right in front of the stone slab that led into the crypt. A slab I had sealed shut with iron nails and a heavy chain. The chain was gone. The slab had shifted. I didn't open it that night. I couldn't. I stood there, staring at that narrow gap in the stone. A darkness so deep it didn't reflect light. A silence that pushed back against sound. And then I heard it. From down below. A voice. Not loud. Not screaming. But speaking. Like a priest giving a sermon to an invisible congregation. A voice both warm and hollow, like echo through bone. I didn't recognize the language. But somehow, I knew exactly what it meant. She is not the prison. She is the gate. I backed away. My hands shook. My thoughts raced. Every part of me wanted to run. Leave the monastery. Flee into the snow. But my body, my cursed, stubborn body, walked back toward Sister Miriam's door instead. And sat down again. Because no matter who, or what, was walking outside, inside was something far worse. And I had 21 nights left. There was a bitter wind slipping through the cracks in the stone that night, and I remember thinking it sounded like someone whispering behind the walls. Not the kind of whisper that makes your skin crawl, not at first. It was more like a memory you almost forget, speaking back to you through time. It was the 22nd night. I hadn't slept properly in 4 days. Not real sleep. I'd rest for an hour, maybe 2, but the dreams always chased me back into the cold. Dreams of a church burning and a face I didn't recognize, long, gaunt, eyes like oil. It always stared at me from behind a veil of smoke, lips moving but never making a sound. I thought maybe I was losing it. Maybe the silence around Sister Miriam was bleeding into me. That's the trick of this place. You start believing the quiet has weight, that it's alive. That night, I found the door. It was behind a broken shelf in the west wing, one I'd walked past a dozen times before. But that evening, the shelf had been moved slightly, tilted just enough to reveal the edge of a rusted metal frame in the wall. A door buried behind wood and time. I don't know what pushed me to open it. Curiosity, maybe. Maybe something worse. The key I'd found 2 nights ago in Brother Calvis's chambers, the one with the strange glyphs carved into its stem, fit perfectly. When I turned it, the lock gave a dry, cracking sound like bone breaking. The door opened into a stairwell that breathed rot and cold. I lit my lantern, and I descended. The stairs were narrow and winding, carved into the stone long before the monastery was built. I could tell from the texture beneath my boots, they were too smooth, too worn, like they'd been used for centuries. After 10 minutes of descent, I reached a chamber. It smelled like old earth, mildew, and burnt oil. There were stone altars and rotted benches, but it was the far wall that caught me. It was covered in symbols. Dozens, hundreds, etched with meticulous precision. Not just Latin, not just Romanian. There were scripts I didn't recognize. Some looked older than language. Symbols that twisted slightly when I stared at them too long. And in the center of the chamber was a table. On it sat a book, covered in human leather. I knew what it was. You just know. The skin stretched across the cover was dry, yellowed, the hair still embedded in patches. The pages inside crackled like they wanted to scream. It was a journal, and the name carved in the first page in blood-red ink stopped my heart. Felix Harrow. I read it slowly, lantern trembling in my hand. The words were precise, calm, as if written by a man completely sane, too sane. A man who believed in every word of his madness. He spoke of silence as a sanctuary. He wrote that God had once spoken the world into existence, and that to undo it, we had to take the words back. One by one. He described Sister Miriam not as a woman, not as a nun, but as a vessel. A sacred lock. He admitted that the exorcism in 1955 had failed, that the thing they tried to banish had instead fused itself with the silence they created. It didn't need a voice anymore. It lived in absence. And Sister Miriam's silence kept it trapped. Then came the last entry, dated just weeks ago. The seal grows thin. The Novissima Vigilia opens once more. I hear her thoughts now. I see the cracks in the veil. I will return to finish what I began. The church tried to bury me. But silence cannot be silenced. FH. I staggered back. Cold sweat coated my neck. My mind reeled. He wasn't dead. Felix Harrow, the man the Vatican swore had perished during a forbidden ritual, was alive. And he was here. Not just haunting the halls with whispers and shadows. No. He was watching. Waiting. Planning. And worse, he was speaking again. I left the crypt in a daze. My legs moved without thinking. The shadows around me seemed darker now. The silence no longer peaceful. It felt charged, like something listening. As I climbed back up into the monastery, a new fear set in. One that hadn't occurred to me before. If Felix was still alive, and Sister Miriam was the gate, then who, or what, had really sent me here? And why did I feel like I was exactly where they needed me to be? The wind howled through the halls as I locked the crypt door behind me. But this time it wasn't wind. It was laughter. Soft. Cold. And coming from just behind my ear. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just walked back to her room, where she sat silently, blindfolded, unmoving. But something was different now. Sister Miriam was trembling. And for the first time since I arrived, her lips were moving. No sound. Just motion. Repeating the same shape. Over and over. A name. Felix. I woke up with the taste of iron in my mouth. It was still dark. The kind of dark that didn't feel like night, but like the sun had been permanently shut out. I sat up slowly, bones aching from the cold stone floor. I didn't remember falling asleep there. I didn't even remember leaving my room. My flashlight was dead again. That was becoming a pattern. But I still had my lighter, and when I struck it, the flame caught, soft and trembling. The hallway flickered to life. That's when I saw it. Red. Thick, dark streaks of it dragged across the monastery wall opposite me. Not paint. Not rust. I knew the smell. Blood. It started at the base of the hallway near Sister Miriam's room, then stretched across the stones in crooked lines and curls. Symbols. Some I recognized from Felix's journal. Others I'd never seen. Some looked like language. Others like someone had tried to scratch out a memory with trembling fingers. I stood. My legs didn't want to move, but they followed anyway. Step by step, I walked the trail. The air was colder than usual. Wet, like breath hanging too long in a room. Miriam's door was open. It was never open. She sat inside, hunched in the corner like a forgotten statue. Her blindfold was still on. Her lips were closed. But her hand held a small nail, stained with red. Her fingers were raw. She'd written every symbol. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My throat locked tight, like it knew sound wasn't safe here. I slowly walked to her side, crouched, and reached for her hand. It trembled slightly, still holding the nail. When my fingers touched hers, she let it go. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Like she'd been waiting for me. On the wall above her bed was one last message, larger than the rest. Scrawled in smeared crimson. Run. I stared at it. The word pulled something deep out of me. Not fear. Not yet. Something closer to understanding. like I was reading the final line of a book I hadn't realized I'd been living in. I looked at her, at the nun who had not spoken a word in 70 years. Her chest rose and fell slowly, like she was dreaming, or remembering. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not echoing. Soft. Bare feet against cold stone. I turned quickly, nothing. No one. But the air had changed. The walls seemed closer. The flicker of the lighter dimmed. My own breath fogged the air, but I couldn't see my reflection in the small window anymore. Just black. That was the first night I tried to leave. I packed. I didn't even pretend to be brave. I grabbed my gun, my bag, the torn pages of Felix's journal, and made for the front gate. It was snowing hard now, thick flakes like pieces of ash falling from the sky. The wind howled like it was mourning something already lost. I reached the gates. They were gone. Not locked. Gone. Where there should have been a path, there was nothing but trees. Endless black pine. The same ones I passed coming in, yes, but wrong now. Their shapes stretched too high. Their trunks bent inward like they were watching. Waiting. I shouted. Not words, just sound. A broken cry, desperate and childlike. The echo didn't come back. My voice just vanished. Like the forest swallowed it. I ran back inside. Miriam hadn't moved. But she knew. I could feel it in the way her head turned just slightly as I passed her. Like she could hear the scream I couldn't. I spent that night pacing the chapel. Candlelight shook. My hands shook more. Something had changed. The monastery wasn't just hiding something. It was responding to it. And Sister Miriam, she was no longer just a vessel. She was a warning. And I was starting to think I wasn't her protector anymore. I was her prisoner. The snow hadn't stopped for days. It coated the windows like a second wall, thick and quiet. Inside the monastery, it felt like time was stretching thin, like the walls remembered more than they should, and the air held whispers not made by wind. I didn't sleep much anymore. Not really. I'd rest my eyes, but something would always jolt me awake. The sound of fabric brushing against stone, footsteps that stopped too soon, or the feeling of someone watching me from the corners where the light didn't reach. Sister Miriam hadn't moved in hours. She just sat, her hands folded on her lap, her blindfold wrapped tight. She looked smaller now, like she was shrinking under the weight of something too heavy to name. But it was her hands that caught my attention tonight. They trembled. Barely. Like a whisper of a quake. I didn't want to read into it. Maybe she was cold. Maybe she was just old. But something inside me said otherwise. I kept thinking about what Felix had said. About how she wasn't the monster, she was the gate. I went back to the journal I found in the crypt. The one Felix had written in 1955, the one that still smelled like mold and old blood. Most of it was unreadable, damaged by time and moisture, but I'd translated enough to know there was more to this story. I flipped through the pages again, carefully, like touching them too fast might wake something sleeping inside. Then I saw it. A section I hadn't noticed before. It had been tucked between two damaged pages, sealed with a sliver of wax. I peeled it open, and there, in his jagged Latin handwriting, was a phrase I'd seen carved into the wall outside Miriam's room. Novissima Vigilia. The last vigil. According to Felix, it happened every 70 years. A thinning. A time when the boundaries between spirit and flesh blurred, when old things stirred in silence. It was a window. A cursed calendar that counted down the strength of the seal binding whatever had been summoned all those years ago. And now we were inside it. 30 nights. That was the length of the vigil. 30 nights where the veil between our world and the other weakened, just enough for something to slip through, if invited. And it wasn't random. It was planned. It was known. The Vatican sent me here not because they didn't understand what was happening, but because they did. I was the replacement. The next watcher in a long line of others who probably hadn't made it. I looked up at Sister Miriam. She didn't flinch. But I noticed something then. Her lips were slightly parted. Just enough for breath. A week ago she never did that. Her mouth was always closed. Always sealed. Now, she seemed like she was waiting to speak. A sick chill ran up my spine. That night, the candles wouldn't stay lit. I'd light them, walk a few steps away, and then the flames would vanish. Not flicker. Not dim. Just gone. At midnight, I heard it again. A sound like weeping coming from behind the chapel doors. Only when I opened them, there was no one there. Just the old wooden pews and the black iron crucifix hanging crooked above the altar. I stepped inside and sat for a moment. I don't know why. Maybe I hoped God would say something. Maybe I just needed a place that felt safer than the rest of the monastery. Then I saw the stain. A dark shape beneath the altar, in the exact spot where Felix described performing the failed ritual. I knelt down and ran my fingers across it. It was dry now, but the color hadn't faded. It wasn't wine. It was blood. There were symbols beneath it, deep carvings in the stone, worn smooth over time. Some I recognized from the journal. Protective seals. Others were just lines and circles and strange open mouths. They told a story. A very old one. I don't know how I understood it, but I did. Maybe the place was speaking to me. Maybe the silence was teaching me its language. I saw a girl, Miriam, young and terrified, kneeling in the circle. Felix chanting. The wind rising. The fire flickering out. And then everything went still. No light. No warmth. No sound. Just her. And it. He never cast the demon out. He couldn't. So he sealed it in her. With silence. Her silence wasn't just a vow. It was a prison. And now the prison walls were cracking. That night, I didn't guard her from the hallway. I sat directly in her room, across from her, watching her chest rise and fall. Watching her lips. I kept thinking about what would happen if she spoke. What would her voice sound like? Would it even be her voice? Would it sound like thousands of voices at once? Would it speak in words or in something older than language? I thought of running, of leaving the monastery, disappearing into the storm, and never looking back. But then she moved. Not much. Just her hand, reaching slowly across the bed toward mine. She never touched me. Just rested her fingers an inch away. A tremor passed through her whole body. Her lips quivered. And then in the smallest whisper I've ever heard, not even a word, just a breath of sound, she exhaled something that sounded like, "Don't." I froze. Everything in me wanted to scream. But I stayed still. Because deep inside, I knew that wasn't her voice. It was something using her body like a mask. And it had just spoken, for the first time in 70 years. The vigil was breaking. And we still had 18 nights to go. The stairwell was colder than usual. It wasn't the type of cold that prickled your skin or made you shiver. It was the kind that sank beneath your bones, deep into the marrow, and stayed there like a memory that refused to fade. I held the lantern up, the weak yellow glow barely cutting through the blackness curling along the edges of the old stone walls. The door to the crypt had been sealed with a thick iron bar the last time I saw it. Now it hung open. I didn't decide to walk in. I was drawn. My boots echoed against the narrow corridor, each step a dull drumbeat in the silence that swallowed this place. I passed the etched warnings on the walls again, the ones in Latin, carved hastily and deep. My eyes lingered on one as I passed. Et verbum fiat mors. And the word shall become death. At the bottom of the steps, the smell hit me, burned incense mixed with old blood and wet stone. A place where time had stopped breathing. He was waiting for me. Felix Harrow. He stood near the altar built from broken pews and blackened relics, hunched like a scarecrow dressed in a priest's remains. His cassock was shredded and stained, his collar half torn. The flame from my lantern flickered when he turned. "Ah, the sentinel arrives," he rasped. His voice was soft but soaked in rot, like he hadn't spoken aloud in years. I didn't speak at first. I didn't trust my voice down here. Not in this place. Not with him. He didn't need my reply. "You felt it, haven't you?" he asked, stepping forward slowly. His eyes were pale, almost translucent, as if the pupils had been burned out by something he once dared to see. The way the veil thins. The voices that aren't yours. The dreams that bleed into waking. I held the lantern tighter. "I know who you are," I said. My voice sounded different here. Smaller. "Of course you do. And I know who you are, George Alden." He smiled, revealing teeth that weren't quite human anymore. "The protector. The rational mind. The one who still believes in cause and effect. How fragile that belief must be by now." He stepped past a row of stone coffins, gesturing for me to follow him deeper. Against my better judgment, I did. The deeper we went, the louder it became, not noise exactly, but a pressure behind the ears. A soundlessness that hurt. "I was never defrocked," Felix said calmly, touching the wall with one hand. "I left. The church didn't cast me out. They locked me away, afraid of what I'd seen. What I'd learned." "And what was that?" I asked, though I already had an idea. Felix turned, his face lit from below by the flickering flame of my lantern. "That silence is holy. That before there was sound, before there was light, before the word, there was silence. Endless. Eternal. The purest form of obedience." His fingers trembled as he lifted a small black book from an altar. Not a Bible. Something older. Pages of parchment, bound in dark hide, stained with symbols that didn't belong in any world I knew. I tried to harness that silence, he whispered, cradling the book like a newborn. I tried to call it down, to wrap it in flesh and give it purpose. And for a moment it worked. His voice dropped lower. But she screamed. He meant Sister Miriam. I felt it in my chest. A tightening like the air was folding inward. She was never meant to survive the ritual. The vessel is not supposed to resist the spirit. And yet she did. She bound it, trapped it within herself through silence. A miracle. A curse. She turned her body into a prison, and her voice into the key. He closed the book, and for a moment we both listened to nothing. That terrible, perfect nothing. You want her to speak, I said. My throat was dry. I want her to finish the sentence she began 70 years ago, Felix replied. The voice of the veil must be released. The world has sung long enough. It is time we listened. You're insane, I said. No, he murmured. I've simply heard too much. He stepped forward again, and I instinctively raised the lantern like a shield. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Every prayer you've ever spoken, George, has floated up into a sky too crowded to respond. Every cry, every whisper, every scream, it's noise. Static. Useless. But if she speaks, the silence will return. Clean. Pure. And with it, truth. You want to end the world. He tilted his head. I want to end the noise. Then he stepped back, vanishing into the corridor, swallowed by the dark. You cannot protect her forever, his voice echoed faintly. She is growing weaker. She wants to be freed. You'll see. They all begged for silence in the end. I stood alone for a long time after he left. The lantern sputtered once. Then the whispers started again. But this time, they were calling her name. The snow didn't fall anymore. It hung, suspended in the air like ash after a fire. I stood at the monastery's main gate that morning, staring out into the white haze, and I swear to you, the world outside wasn't moving. Not a sound. Not a gust of wind. Even the birds were gone. It was the 27th night. I tried calling the Vatican satellite phone again, dead. No signal, no dial tone, no response. Just silence. Not even static. That's when I realized I hadn't heard my own breath in what felt like hours. The silence here had weight. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was something alive, coiled around the monastery like a snake. Watching. Listening. Inside, Sister Miriam hadn't moved from her cot. But something about her had changed. Her hands were folded in prayer, but her fingers twitched. The skin on her lips had begun to crack and peel, as if something beneath them was trying to force its way out. I kept my distance. I sat in the hallway just outside her room, facing the large wooden door with the carved cross in the middle. My sidearm was in my lap. A flask of holy water hung from my belt. And still I felt utterly unarmed. That night, the candles wouldn't stay lit. Every few minutes, one would sputter and vanish, even though there was no wind, no draft. I relit them until my fingers were wax-coated and trembling. That's when the humming started. It came from beneath the floor. Not loud, just enough to rattle the wood under my boots. A dull, constant vibration. Not a machine. Not pipes. It was like a voice, singing one long, endless note. I rushed to Miriam's door. She was still there, still silent, but her mouth was slightly open now, and her head tilted toward the floor. As if listening. No. As if answering. I bolted the door from the outside and ran. I went down into the lower halls, the passage leading to the crypt. The humming got louder with every step. The stone walls wept moisture. The crucifixes on the walls had all tilted. Some hung upside down. Others shattered on the floor like they had been flung by invisible hands. When I reached the base of the staircase, I saw light seeping through the cracks of the stone door. A flickering orange glow. Firelight. Someone was already down there. I unholstered my gun and pushed the door open. Felix Harrow was waiting. He stood in a circle of flame, robes soaked in oil and blood, pages of scripture nailed to the walls around him, each one written in reverse Latin. The man hadn't aged a day from the photo in his journal. But his eyes, they were gone. Empty sockets, burned black, weeping smoke. He smiled. You've come to witness it then, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang inside my skull like a bell. The womb of silence is ready to give birth. I raised my weapon. Back away from the circle. Felix chuckled. Your bullets won't work here, George. This is consecrated desecration. You're breathing in uncreation now. He spread his arms and looked upward. The veil is thin, he whispered. Tonight, you'll hear what angels sound like when they scream. I fired anyway. The shot echoed off the walls like thunder. His shoulder jerked back, but no blood spilled. The wound closed within seconds. He didn't even flinch. "She's opening," he said. "You've kept her shut for too long. Her mouth isn't a mouth, boy. It's a gate." Her silence wasn't protection. It was containment. And then I felt it. The air bent. It wasn't a gust or a quake. It was as if gravity turned sideways for a moment, and the walls of the crypt shuddered like lungs exhaling. I stumbled backward and grabbed at the wall to steady myself. Above us, I heard something I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. Not quite. It was like thousands of voices trying to speak all at once, each in a different language, layered over each other so thickly that it turned into a single low moan. Like the sound the earth would make if it could feel pain. I ran. I had to get back to her. I climbed those stairs faster than I ever had, nearly slipping on the wet stone. The humming had become a howl now, alive and moving through the halls. Shadows crawled across the walls like ink spilled underwater. When I reached Sister Miriam's door, it was open. I hadn't left it open. Inside, she was no longer sitting. She was standing in the center of the room, arms outstretched, her blindfold gone. Her eyes were white. Not rolled back, just white. No iris. No pupils. Empty like chalk. She didn't see me. Or maybe she saw too much. Her mouth opened again, wider this time, and from her lips came no sound, yet every window in the monastery shattered. I dropped to my knees. My ears bled. My head felt like it was being split in half. But still no sound. Only the effect of sound. That's when I knew. The thing inside her wasn't trying to speak. It was trying to exist. Because in the next room, the walls were cracking. Dust fell from the ceiling. And in the deepest part of my soul, something screamed in a voice that didn't belong to me. Not yet. But soon. And the 28th night was still to come. I hadn't slept for 2 nights. Maybe 3. I lost count after the walls started breathing. The monastery was colder than usual. Not just in the bones, but deep, like something had pressed its lips against the stone and sucked all warmth from it. I wrapped the old monk's cloak around me tighter and stood outside Sister Miriam's door. She hadn't moved in hours. That was the strange part. Usually by midnight she would shift. Fingers twitching, chest rising faster. But tonight she was still. Her head tilted slightly to the side. Her blindfold damp from sweat, or tears, or both. It looked wrong. Not like sleep. More like waiting. The bells rang once. It was 3 a.m. The devil's hour. And that's when the whispering stopped. You don't notice it at first, you know. When something is always there, like the hum of a fridge or the ticking of a clock, you forget it's part of the world. Until it goes silent. Until your ears feel empty. Like the sound was stolen, not silenced. That's what happened. The walls stopped breathing. The whispers in the corners gone. And in that silence I heard it. A breath. Sharp. Soft. From inside her cell. I opened the door slowly. The candles inside had all gone out, even though I'd just lit them an hour ago. All but one. It flickered on the far side of the room, casting shadows that didn't match the furniture. She was sitting on the edge of the bed now. Her back straight. Head up. Facing me. "Miriam?" I whispered. I regretted it instantly. The room pulsed. Like my voice had disturbed something very old and very angry. Her hands trembled. Not like fear, more like pressure building beneath the skin. Her fingers curled into her lap, clutching her rosary tight enough to leave marks. Her mouth was closed. But barely. And then she opened it. Not wide. Just a crack. As if the air was too heavy to part her lips. And out came a sound. If you can even call it that. It was like silence trying to scream. My ears burned. Literally. Heat shot through them, like I was being scalded from the inside. Blood trickled down my neck. My knees buckled. I fell, slamming into the stone floor. The crucifix around my neck began to shake. She was still staring at me. Her mouth slightly open. Not blinking. And the sound, this unnatural, void-like note, it wasn't loud. It was quiet. So quiet, it scraped against something in my mind. A silence deeper than silence. A negative sound. And in that horrible moment, I saw her. Not Miriam. Not really. Something behind her eyes. Something pressed against her skull from the inside, warping the skin just enough that her cheeks twitched, like something was smiling from beneath. And then I saw her lips move. Just slightly. She mouthed a word. One syllable. I couldn't hear it, but I felt it. In my teeth. In my blood. In the memory of every prayer I'd ever forgotten. It was like the word rewrote something in me. I saw a church burning in reverse, flames pulling back into the altar. I saw my mother crying at my funeral, even though I wasn't dead. I saw Felix, younger, eyes wild, shouting at the heavens in Latin, and I saw him fall to his knees in front of Sister Miriam in 1955. And then it stopped. All of it, like someone had slammed a door shut in my brain. Sister Miriam closed her mouth. The room snapped back into place. I gasped, crawled backward, hit the wall. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't reach for my gun. And she sat still again, head bowed, breathing slow, like nothing had happened. But I knew. Something had changed. She had spoken. Not fully, not loudly, but enough. Enough to crack the veil. Enough to let it peek through. And some old, primal part of me, knew we wouldn't survive if she ever finished the sentence. The door to the crypt creaked open behind me. Felix was waiting, and the ritual had already begun. I didn't sleep. Not that I could anymore. The cold had seeped deep into the stones of St. Agnes, and I could feel it in my bones, like the monastery itself was dying slowly. A death not from time, but from something old and foul awakening beneath its bones. It was the 30th night. I stood outside Sister Miriam's chamber, staring at the door like it might vanish if I blinked. My hand trembled on the doorknob. The hallway was darker than usual. Candles snuffed themselves out, one by one, until I was left with a single, flickering light behind me. The shadows in this place, they didn't just move, they listened. And tonight, they whispered louder than ever. My breath fogged the air. Snow beat against the stained glass windows like ghostly fists trying to get in. Or out. When I finally opened the door, Sister Miriam was already sitting up in her bed, eyes still blindfolded, lips shut tight. But her head turned slightly in my direction, like she felt me enter. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. No wind, no light, just her and me. For a while, neither of us moved. The silence was unbearable. Then I spoke. "It's time, isn't it?" Of course, she said nothing. But I saw her shoulders twitch, like something inside her wanted to claw its way out. I approached slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I got closer, I noticed something dripping from her fingertips. Black fluid, like oil but thick and warm. She had been bleeding in her sleep. Again. "Miriam," I said softer now. "I've done everything they told me. I watched you. I stayed near you. I never let you speak. But it's not working, is it?" Her lips trembled. That small motion, barely visible, hit me harder than any bullet ever had. Suddenly, the candles in the room all flared at once, lighting the walls with a sickly red hue. The air grew thick, like syrup. It pressed down on my chest, made it hard to breathe. The room smelled of sulfur and old incense. And then I heard it, from beneath the floorboards. Chanting. Low. Rhythmic. Wet. "Felix." I grabbed my flashlight and turned toward the trapdoor in the hallway, the one leading to the catacombs. I had sealed it days ago. It was open now. Black, yawning, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. A deep voice rose from below, echoing against the stone. "Novissima vigilia, apri veritatem." I didn't understand the words fully, but I felt them in my spine. In my teeth. They weren't meant for human ears. I looked back at Miriam. Her mouth was open slightly. Just a sliver. From it came a sound, not quite a voice, not quite wind. It was like hearing silence breathe. I dropped to my knees. "No," I whispered. "Not now. Don't speak. Don't, please." Tears welled up in my eyes. She reached for my hand. For the first time in 30 nights, she touched me. Her skin was ice, and she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. I felt her meaning in that grip. Not fear. Acceptance. She wanted this to end. But I couldn't let her speak. Not yet. The monastery rumbled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The stained glass cracked behind me, letting in freezing air and snow. The voices below grew louder. Felix was finishing it. If he completed the ritual, the seal holding whatever ancient thing was inside Miriam would tear open like wet paper. And the world would learn the true sound of silence. I turned and ran. Down the hallway, past dead candles and shattered icons, toward the open trapdoor. Every step felt like I was wading through water. The shadows clung to me, whispering old prayers in reverse. I grabbed the rusted ladder and climbed down into the dark. My flashlight flickered, then died. Only the chanting guided me now. The catacombs were colder than I remembered. Bones lined the walls, skulls stacked like bricks. As I moved deeper, the air began to shimmer. A red glow pulsed ahead. I turned the corner. Felix stood at the center of an ancient circle carved into the stone, candles burning with blue fire. He wore tattered priest robes, soaked in black fluid. His eyes were white, glowing. He looked up as I entered. "Ah," he said, voice like cracked stone. "The guardian arrives." Just in time to hear the song. He gestured to the center of the circle. Miriam was there, but not the Miriam I knew. This one floated above the ground, her blindfold gone, eyes empty voids of swirling shadow. Her mouth opened and closed like she was learning how to speak for the first time. "She's ready," Felix said, smiling like a madman. "She has carried it long enough. The silence wants release. And we must listen." I stepped forward, drawing the old iron blade I had taken from the chapel. The only thing blessed in this godforsaken place. Felix didn't flinch. "You cannot stop the truth," he whispered. And Miriam began to hum. A single note. Low. Terrifying. It felt like every memory I had was unraveling. Like I was being erased. I dropped to one knee, blade clattering to the floor. Blood ran from my nose. My ears. My eyes. The humming grew louder. Felix raised his hands. "This is the new gospel. The age of silence." I reached for the blade. One chance. I would not let the world die unheard. Not tonight. Not while I still had a voice. Not while I still remembered my name. I screamed and charged. Everything after that came in flashes. The blade sinking into Felix's chest. His scream, which never reached my ears. The light pouring from Miriam's eyes. And the silence that followed. A silence so deep it felt holy. And wrong. Like something ancient had just opened one eye and blinked. To be continued. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 17, A Choice of Damnation next? The air in the chapel was thick, heavy like the weight of all the prayers that had been whispered here over centuries, now twisted and trapped in the shadows. My breath came fast and shallow, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The cold stone beneath my knees seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I was caught in the center of a nightmare that refused to end. Felix stood before me, eyes burning with a strange light, a crazed calm that sent shivers crawling up my spine. His robes swayed like the branches of a dead tree in a storm, and his voice echoed off the walls, soaked in a madness I could barely grasp. "She is not the monster, George," he said softly, almost kindly. "She is the door, the gateway, to silence, to peace beyond the noise of this broken world." I shook my head, gripping the crucifix I'd pulled from the altar, feeling its cold weight like a thin thread holding me tethered to what little faith I had left. "Your silence is a prison," I said, voice trembling but firm. "She's trapped in a hell you created, and you want to drag the rest of us down with her." Felix laughed then, a sound like dry leaves scraping against tombstones. "Hell," he whispered. "No, my friend. This is salvation. The world has lost its way in sound, in words that breed lies and sin. Silence is the true grace. When she speaks, the noise will stop. The veil will open. No more pain. No more fear." Behind him, Sister Miriam floated, her body swaying as if caught in a slow wind I could not feel. Her blindfold had slipped just enough to reveal eyes shining with something that was not human, a deep void, a blackness that pulled at my soul. Her lips parted, the barest hint of a smile curling like smoke in a dark room. I stared at her and saw the years, the decades of silence that were not peace, but a battle raging within her. She wanted to be free. I understood that now. She was begging for release, even if it meant death, even if it meant the end of everything. "Let her speak," Felix urged, stepping closer. "You cannot stop what is meant to be." A scream ripped from my chest, the kind that tore through my mind and spilled out raw and desperate. "No," I said, voice cracking. "I won't let you. Not tonight. Not ever." I lunged forward, clutching the dagger I had hidden in my boot, the same blade that had ended the suffering of so many lost souls. Felix met me with a snarl, pulling a dark charm from his robe, chanting words that burned like acid in the air. Time fractured. The chapel walls bent, twisting like the branches of a gnarled tree. Shadows bled into light, and light collapsed into blackness. Miriam's form shimmered, caught between this world and the next. I felt the pull, a force dragging at my very being, threatening to snuff out my last breath. But I held on, pushing through the pain, through the fear. With a final cry, I drove the dagger into Felix's chest. He gasped, eyes wide with shock, and then something almost like peace crossed his face. He whispered, "You chose mercy." As he fell, the shadows recoiled, and the oppressive weight lifted, but only slightly. I turned to Miriam, who now knelt on the cold stone, tears carving silent trails down her pale cheeks. She looked at me with gratitude, though she could not speak. In that moment, I knew the fight was not over, not for either of us. My body ached, my vision blurred, but I forced myself to kneel beside her. "Silence is a mercy," I whispered back. The final prayer escaped my lips, shaky but true. And as the chapel settled into an uneasy calm, I felt my own breath slow. The watcher had become the watched. The cold air in the chapel bit through my clothes like 1,000 tiny needles, but I barely noticed. The world around me was unraveling. Candles flickered and died, shadows twisted into shapes that weren't there before. The stone walls groaned, as if they carried the weight of every secret this place had ever swallowed. And in the center, Sister Miriam hovered just above the cold floor, her pale hands shaking, her blindfold stained with something dark, something alive. Felix's voice filled the chamber. His words were not quite prayers, not quite curses. They slithered through the air, curling around my thoughts, trying to choke them out. He begged me to let her speak again. "She is not the monster," he said, voice sharp and desperate. "She is the door to a truth this world cannot bear." I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was mad. But beneath the fear and the cold, I understood something awful. Miriam wasn't just a prisoner of silence. She was the key to something beyond comprehension. And if she broke free, all of this, all the pain, the fear, the dark whispers would pour out and drown the world. Her mouth twitched, lips parting just slightly. The air thickened, heavy like the moment before a storm crashes. I felt the pull of that silent scream inside her, a scream that wanted to shatter the fragile barrier between us and the void. I could hear it then, inside my mind, whispers crawling beneath my skin, clawing at my sanity. I thought of all the nights I spent watching her, listening to the silence that screamed louder than any voice. I thought of the blood on the walls, the broken prayers, the cold weight of this place pressing down on my soul. And then I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward, voice trembling but steady. I prayed aloud, words I barely understood but poured from some deep place inside me. The prayer wasn't just a shield, it was a chain, binding the darkness back into the void it tried to escape. Miriam's body convulsed, and I could feel the tension break and snap like a rope pulled too tight. Felix lunged at me, his eyes wild with fury and desperation. I met him head-on, fighting not just for my life, but for the silence that held the world from breaking apart. My knife found his heart, sharp and sure. He fell, a broken man swallowed by the shadows he summoned. But I was not free. As the last echoes of Felix's screams faded, I felt the seal shift. Miriam's weight lifted from the air, and I crumpled to the floor, breath shallow and burning. The darkness whispered one final promise: the vessel must be filled. I looked down at my hands, trembling. They were stained with more than blood now. The silence seeped into my bones, threading through my veins, wrapping tight around my heart. Slowly, I lowered myself to sit on the cold stone floor. My lips moved without sound, sewing themselves shut in my mind. The blindfold came down over my eyes, and I embraced the quiet. I was the new guardian now, the silent watcher, the vessel between worlds. And the whispers began again. I never thought I'd see the world again. The last thing I remember is the cold biting into my skin as I sank beneath the stones of that cursed monastery, the weight of silence pressing down like a shroud. But here I am somehow alive, or at least breathing. The snow has softened the edges of the old stone ruins, hiding the scars of what happened long ago. The wind carries a bitter chill that claws at my face, and the sky above is a bruised gray, heavy with the promise of another storm. Somewhere far off, a crow cries, a lone sound in a place that should be utterly silent. I sit against the crumbled wall of the chapel, my back resting on cold stone that smells of damp earth and forgotten prayers. My blindfold is tight across my eyes, and my lips are sewn shut with rough, coarse thread. I do not speak. I cannot. The silence is my prison and my protection. The footsteps come before I hear them, slow and cautious, crunching softly through the snow. I sense the presence long before the figure appears. A man in a dark coat, carrying a bag heavy with questions he isn't yet brave enough to ask. He stops just beyond the edge of the ruin, eyes scanning the broken stones and shattered stained glass that once glowed with holy light. The monastery is dead to the world, but I am here, the last living seal of a secret no one dares speak aloud. He approaches, voice low and measured, almost afraid to break the silence. "Are you the guardian?" His words hang in the cold air like fragile glass. I do not answer. I cannot. He kneels beside me, studying the blindfold, the sewn lips, the stillness that surrounds me like a shadow. His hands tremble as he reaches out, but he hesitates, as if touching me might shatter the fragile line between this world and the one I keep locked inside. "The Vatican sent me," he says softly, "to check if the seal still holds." I remember the nights, the darkness thicker than black ink, the screams that never escaped her lips, the ritual that almost tore the world apart. And now it is me, the silent sentinel. A cold wind whispers through the ruins, carrying voices just beyond understanding. The old prayers have turned to desperate pleas. I feel the weight of the demon waiting beneath the stones, restless and patient, lurking just beyond the veil I guard with my silence. The man shivers and pulls his coat tighter around him. "You're still alive," he murmurs, almost to himself. "How?" I want to tell him. I want to scream that this curse is no mercy, no salvation. That silence is a prison, a weapon, and a curse all at once. But my lips remain sealed. The silence answers for me. He places a small cross beside me, the silver catching the faint light. May it keep the darkness at bay. The wind stirs again, and for a moment, the ruins seem to hold their breath. Somewhere deep beneath us, a faint, terrible sound begins, a whisper, a breath, a secret trying to break free. I press my palms into the cold stone, bracing myself. The vigil continues. The watch never ends, and the silence waits.